These are Thaddeus and Thor, Phineas and Ferb's nasty alter egos, known for their crazy inventions and for their older sister who's also hell-bent on trying to bust them. They're pretty much Phineas and Ferb's evil twins, yet they made a single appearance in season 2 and they were never brought back again, if not in the background of literally just 2 shots. So what happened to them? Were they just a bland copy of Phineas, Ferb and Candace with a bit of an extra edge? Did they not have anything else you bring to the table after their debut episode? In today's video, I'll prove that the answer is in fact, hell no. They act as the perfect antagonists to Phineas and Ferb. They're a pair of rivals so full of themselves that they make up for what they lack in the creativity department with their snarky attitude. In that sense, they can be considered character foils for the boys, highlighting their pure intentions and positive outlook. When Thaddeus attacks with an insult, Phineas answers with a compliment and a kind word. It's the rarest thing to find someone in the tri-state area who does not like the boys and wants to show them up. Thaddeus and Thor are the only ones in that department, and that's what makes them so special. Buford did provide that kind of antagonism in the past, but never the competition element. Despite some envy, Candace too doesn't care to compete with them, and despite trying to get them busted, she doesn't want them to be humiliated or discredited in front of their family and friends. And even though Baljeet would like to get some recognition and sees himself as the unsung intellectual giant of the group, who could technically put up a fight with them, he does not really see the boys as competition. So we never got anything even remotely close to the Thaddeus and Thor dynamic. And I realize I'll be saying the names Thaddeus and Thor an awful lot today, so I might just call them the anti-boys every once in a while, just to mix it up. Phineas and Ferb are rarely the main focus of a story, since there's not high stakes or much tension when it comes to their plots. They usually set someone else's story in motion, typically Candace's, and we get a few jokes out of them and their friends, but that's pretty much it. So giving them a pair of antagonists that wanna upstage them and put them to shame would shake things up for them quite a lot. They would be confronted with people who actively dislike them. Even Candace, despite everything, still cares about them so very much. If you think about it, almost everyone on the show has a nemesis. Doof has Perry, Candace has Susie, Linda even has Edison's mom now apparently, and the show's lore care to highlight how every single villain and evil scientist worth his salt is always assigned a nemesis. So why don't we give the boys this thrill as well with these recurring nemesis? Of course, I don't need to see Thaddeus and Thor show up every other episode and become regulars or something, but dedicating even just one single 10-minute segment per season to them, it could really set up an interesting ongoing rivalry. A one-sided rivalry, of course, because of how oblivious the boys are, but they would be confronted with an unwanted feud tied to their creativity. So think of what Candace has with Susie. They don't have daily encounters, but each new one builds on the past ones and feels so very special. We know the anti-boys, yeah, I like the sound of that. The anti-boys are from Danville, but don't live on Maple Drive. As in their debut episode, they explain they were just visiting their aunt who lives right next door. So it would make sense for them to show up for a day or two every month or so as they visit Mrs. Weaver again. It would actually be a very valid reason as to why they're not constantly butting heads with Phineas and Ferb. After all, they do not live there. So okay, sure, we like the anti-boys. What are we gonna do with them? Let's start with the simplest premise. Given how competitive they are, I could see Thaddeus and Thor challenge Phineas and Ferb to an obstacle course, a maze, or an escape room of some kind, where they gotta use their intellect and take advantage of random tools and objects around them to get to the end first. And since the anti-boys don't quite match Phineas and Ferb's intellect, despite being smarter than the average kid and can build some pretty great stuff pretty quickly and with extreme ease, the writers could increase their lack of morals a bit to level the playing field. I could easily see them cheat in a competition to keep up with the boys, which again would reinforce the idea of Phineas and Ferb being so honest and law-abiding, while the anti-boys just lie and cheat through it all. So with that in mind, being envious of Phineas and Ferb's success, Thaddeus and Thor could sabotage the boys' invention, trying to destroy it, causing their latest big idea to turn into a huge mess, so they'd lose their respect and recognition from everyone in town. What if their cool contraption turned into a dangerous death trap? Involving Candace, the anti-boys could try to destroy whatever Phineas and Ferb are building, but since Candy Cane needs the thing to remain intact so she can show it to her mom, she could spend the entire episode personally trying to stop Thaddeus and Thor's meddling. We've never really seen Candace actively trying to protect whatever Phineas and Ferb are doing. Similarly, the anti-boys could pass themselves off for Phineas and Ferb, causing chaos around town to ruin their image. Something Doofenshmirtz also tried with his Perry clones. Plus, more in general, who knows how the rest of the gang would even feel about them. I can't imagine Isabella would allow Thaddeus to badmouth Phineas, and I gotta assume Buford would be coming up with pretty devastating comebacks to their insults. All in all, since Thaddeus and Thor are meant to act as foils to the boys, and see themselves as the best as far as creativity is concerned, when they build their things, they seem to be motivated by fame and recognition from others, rather than just trying to have fun like the boys. So, since Phineas and Ferb are all successful and beloved by the community, they'd be stealing Thaddeus and Thor's spotlight. They'd steal the show, leaving the anti-boys extremely envious and even vengeful. Of course, with Thaddeus and Thor in the picture, their older sister Mandy would also be brought back. Being Candace's alter ego, she too is obsessed with busting her brothers and doesn't really differ from her in that regard. They seem to mirror each other almost perfectly, unless we'll someday find out Mandy has completely different reasons to get her brothers busted. Now, Mandy was lucky enough to get a second relevant appearance in the series. She came back in season 3's Perry the Actopus as the head of the Stop the Busting program, some sort of course for sisters who wanna stop trying to bust their siblings. Candace too joins it, but by the end of the episode, despite an apparent initial change of heart, Candace ends up giving Mandy and the other girls a motivational speech, convincing them to go back to busting. So this leaves Mandy open to both returning to her old habits and acting as someone who matured, successfully leaving her busting days behind her. But honestly, given how Candace herself will always default back to trying to bust the boys, having Mandy be the one getting over it instead would kinda make Candace look bad in comparison, so it would probably be better if Mandy also remained obsessed. And as long as she's still trying to bust her brothers, she's also gonna have a whole lot of potential. This would open the door to a few interesting scenarios, one of them being a Candace and Mandy pair up for an episode, the simplest idea of course. But the thing is, unlike everyone else who helped Candace bust her brothers in the past, Stacy, Jenny, Albert, Buford, Vanessa indirectly I guess, and even Jeremy more recently, Mandy's the only one who does understand where Candace is coming from. Everyone else simply puts up with her and helps her just to indulge her, but Mandy actually shares the same motivation and view on things. While Lulu Jones, the host of the TV program Bust Them, was way too hysterical to lend an ear with empathy, Mandy could actually help Candace feel validated. Candace wouldn't feel so alone and misunderstood. In fact, I've always believed that, in a very subtle way, Mandy's mere existence actually contributes to making Candace's character so much more sympathetic. By having another sister desperately trying to bust her brothers, we're solidifying the idea that in Phineas and Ferb's universe, busting is quite common. It's not like Candace is an antagonist who just wants to get her brothers in trouble because she's mean and a bad person. No, that's what everybody does. Everybody wants to bust their brothers here. Look at Mandy and the girls in the Stop the Busting program. Look at Lulu Jones having a fully fledged TV program dedicated to it. Or Candace's driving instructor so keen on busting his sister. And let's not forget Vanessa trying to bust her dad and Linda wanting to bust Edison's mom. Heck, think of how Roger interpreted Candace's essay about busting the boys as a metaphor, for the government should strive to bust the little brothers of corporate greed to the mom of fiscal responsibility. These characters make it clear that busting your brothers is a thing in this universe, typically associated with responsibility, just like evil is universally considered a business, a hobby, and a passion. It's an excellent touch for world-building purposes that in turn puts things into perspective and makes Candace quite normal and easier to root for. More of Mandy, sporadically again, no main character status for her, every once in a while for an episode or even a small interaction with Candace would really enhance this effect even more. If you think about it, the return of Mandy and the anti-boys could even allow for some original and ironic outcomes, like Linda seeing Thaddeus and Thor's contraption instead of Phineas and Ferb's. That would be the ultimate humiliation for Candace. But more importantly, and I'm willing to die on this hill, since we're never ever gonna see Candace actually bust Phineas and Ferb without everything going back to normal through time travel or minds being erased, as that's the formula that makes everything work, we can't really change that. What if someone else got busted instead? Nobody said that we can't see Thaddeus and Thor getting busted. That wouldn't alter the status quo or the formula, and it would even give the audience a hint of what Phineas and Ferb getting busted could lead to as their alter egos go through it. Most people seem to fail to imagine how Linda would be mad at the boys for the amazing things they do, so let's show them. Also, when it comes to busting, wouldn't it be nice for Candace to get a win that doesn't get retroactively nullified? Well, do I have a plot for you? Imagine a parody of the movie Strangers on a Train. For context, these two guys meet on a train and agree to swap murders to each kill one's wife and the other's father. Since they're complete strangers, nobody would suspect a thing and they could both get away with murder. So imagine Candace and Mandy swapping busts. They each try to bust each other's brothers with their own unique set of skills. Mandy would be following the boys around, while Candace would be trying to bust Thaddeus and Thor to their mom, dad, or aunt. The whole thing could culminate with Mandy failing to bust Phineas and Ferb, admitting that Candace does have it harder, empathizing with her, while Candace could finally succeed at busting the anti-boys, giving her the closest thing to her lifelong dream being achieved, which would build up her self-esteem dramatically. If she can bust Mandy's brothers, then it's just a matter of time until she busts Phineas and Ferb as well. That would really motivate her. After Mandy's second appearance, it seems she and Candace are on neutral terms, so I could totally see this happen. I actually really like the idea of Candace being an expert at busting others, succeeding with Thaddeus and Thor, or even with Susie's little friend as we saw in Meet Me in St. Louis, and who knows who else, while the only people she just can never seem to bust are her brothers. I think that'd be pretty cool, because it shows that it's not like Candace is incapable of busting Phineas and Ferb, it's just that fate, or the mysterious force, or however you want to call it, doesn't really allow her to get a win. In general, having Thaddeus, Thor, and Mandy return for even a single episode each season as they come visit their aunt or just happen to be in the neighborhood, it could be a lot of fun. We could draw so many cool parallels between them and Candace and the boys, while placing Phineas and Ferb in new, nasty situations other characters on the show were just never able to provide. And just to up the stakes and the drama for the boys even more, the writers could actually step up Thaddeus and Thor's game a bit. Not to the point of suddenly rivaling Phineas and Ferb's intellect, but making them a little more resourceful and smart, and of course a little meaner, to the point perhaps where they can also create something cool like a giant roller coaster, a treehouse robot, or an animal translator, but not something as improbable as a working rocket ship or a portal to Mars. After all, maybe that fort isn't really the best they can do. Phineas and Ferb sometimes build some pretty average things, like the chariots. It's not like Thaddeus and Thor couldn't have built those. Thaddeus and Thor could act as Phineas and Ferb haters, taking that antagonistic role that initially kinda belonged to Buford, until when the writers run out of interesting stories for them, through a forced cooperation with the boys perhaps, they start seeing them in a different light and perhaps get on good terms with them. But hey, this is just a random thought I had the other day and suddenly decided to make a video about them. Let me know your thoughts on bringing Thaddeus, Thor, and Mandy back, and whether you'd like to see some more videos on the show's one-off or secondary characters. Lulu Jones, Doofenshmirtz vs. Evil Girlfriend, but even Charlene and Coltrane, there's so much that could be done with all of them. With that said, I thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. By the way, Anti-Boys makes so much sense because they were introduced as their aunt's nephews, so they're not just anti-boys as in anti-Phineas and Ferb, the opposites of Phineas and Ferb, but they're also their aunties boys. But of course, if you say aunt instead of aunt, then the whole thing kinda falls apart. Whatever, ciao!